Welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron, Noob McDad. Thanks, Noob. You're awesome.
Yes, thank you very much. I know we found you on Minecraft, so hopefully you get over this one as well.
It might be MC Dad. That might be what the MC stands for, Tony.
I don't know.
Or
I kind of like the idea of a very, or a very Irish dad, McDad.
What's a bad idea for this week, Tony?
We're going to be talking about Project Alpha.
It sounds like a sort of a cheesy B movie from the 50s.
It kind of does, and it actually deals with psychic powers and things of that nature, so it might fit into that category.
Okay. I don't see how this could be a bad idea at all. I want to develop my psychic powers, Tony.
Well, we'll get there in a second and figure out the best way to get you your psychic powers.
All right.
This all starts with the field of parapsychology. Parapsychology is the field in which the scientific method is applied to such phenomena as telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, and ESP, extrasensory perception. Think Venkman from Ghostbusters, basically.
So it's fake.
I mean, yeah, of course, but we still have to, use the scientific method to disprove it.
I guess that is fair. Like, you can't just say, no, it's not real. Like, if you're gonna study psychicism and like precognition and stuff, you should at least have some kind of benchmarks.
Yeah, like there's got to be some controlled experiments, that sort of thing. But parapsychology is a field that's always been under heavy scrutiny. In the late 70s, there had been studies done and published, but no proof of psychics or mediums could be produced. Many parapsychologists claimed that this was because their studies were underfunded and they lacked the equipment to come up with solid determinations. Because of this, they felt like they couldn't do properly controlled experiments to verify any of the psychics' claims.
This is a weird, either you know what I'm thinking or you don't. It seems like that would be relatively easy to prove. What kind of equipment do you need?
I couldn't figure out exactly what they were doing. I don't think they had an fMRI back then, so it's not like they could tell if somebody had different things going on in their mind. It's just a weird claim, but that was the main thing that they clung to. But
well, if you had a real psychic, okay, if you had somebody who was like, I can read your mind, at that point, then yes, you would want to be like, what's going on? But I think the process of figuring out whether you can predict the future or know what somebody's thinking or see with your brain inside of a box, that part wouldn't be that technologically difficult.
Yeah, and whenever you hear about some of the experiments that they run, it doesn't sound very expensive either. But enter James S. McDonnell of McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. He's a longtime believer and devotee to the paranormal, and McDonnell wanted to prove that through parapsychology that human beings were capable of these sorts of extrasensory powers. He decided to create a $500,000 grant that he gave to Washington University at St. Louis that established the McDonnell Laboratory for Psychical Research.
Good for him.
Yeah, so he's putting the money up. He wants proof, and he's willing to put that money down. So, at this newly established lab, physics professor Peter R. Phillips determined that his lab would investigate psychokinetic metal bending by children. It didn't end up being...
that's ambitious to start right off with.
Yeah, like you gotta find kids that are fully able to bend spoons and stuff with their mind.
Did they have this on hand? Was it like, man, we got kids all over the place that can bend spoons. The trick is finding one that can't. Like, again, this seems like such a wildly ambitious thing to start with. Not like, we're going to see if have some cards with some shapes on them and see if they can figure out what the shapes are without looking at the cards. It's like, we're going to bend metal spoons, man, like in the Matrix.
Well,
what?
Also, the reason why he chose children is that he believed that children were less likely to lie about that. And I don't think that person has ever met kids. So
kids are honest in a very specific kind of way.
Yeah.
It's not like they're incapable of lying. They just don't care really what you think about them.
Yeah, it's just a different type of thing there. It was at this point that noted magician, skeptic, and debunker James Randi took an interest in the project. Randi had been skeptical of the results from some parapsychologists. He wanted them to work specifically with mentalists, magicians, and conjurers that would be able to help these scientists understand if they were being deceived or if what they were looking at was straight up legitimate. Because he thought that a lot of scientists and laymen alike aren't able to fully tell how these tricks are being done because some of these people are so good at what they do.
So his hypothesis was that there's kids coming in and they're actually charlatans. Like they're straight up either trained or have figured out how to make something look like it's happening and you're just getting duped.
The kid experiment was only on for a little bit because anytime they left the room, the kids would just step on the spoons and say that they bent it, but they left the cameras on. So the kid experiments didn't last for very long.
That's like such a bizarre, like it's the or the prequel maybe to the marshmallow experiment.
Yeah. It's like, did the kid decide to bend the spoon or did they actually wait until the spoon bent?
If I come back and the spoon is bent, with your mind, you'll get a marshmallow.
But he said that parapsychologists had an implicit pro-psychic bias that blinded researchers to their own protocols. The bias was also amplified because these scientists didn't understand or have experience in manipulating or deceiving people like the mentalists and magicians did. Like, that's literally their job. Also, if you've ever heard of the $1 million paranormal challenge, this was done by James Randi. His foundation put up $1 million to anyone that could prove any sort of psychic powers. The project ran from the late 60s and was retired in 2015 without a single person ever claiming that prize.
Well, that's just because he didn't believe hard enough, Tony.
Yeah, he didn't have faith in it.
You probably wanted him to, like, actually prove things and stuff. Some kind of jerk.
Randi was notorious for getting people in really, really uncomfortable situations on TV. Like, he got Uri Geller, who claimed to bend spoons and be able to tell, like, which containers had water and which didn't. And he basically told him, bring your own stuff and we're going to let you use it on the Johnny Carson show. And then at the last second swapped out everything, and it turned into one of like the most uncomfortable 10-minute interviews ever, as Geller couldn't do anything with the props that were brought in. So this is that type of guy. He's like a hard skeptic and basically puts people on the spot on national television anytime he can.
You know what I will say for Uri Geller, though? Great guest on Coast to Coast AM.
Yes, he is. Some parapsychologists agreed with Randi. Stanley Krippner, then president of the Parapsychological Association, agreed with Randi that qualified experienced conjurers were essential for design, implementation, and evaluation of experiments in parapsychology. Unfortunately, many of the parapsychologists ignored Randi, as they had been ignoring similar criticism for more than 150 years in the field. Randi would go on to send Dr. Phillips a list of protocols that he should use for testing the psychics he selected, such as not letting the test subjects run the experiments. He also warned that scientists not give in to demands from the psychics for special experimental conditions, because this is a way that they can introduce subterfuge and manipulation. The last caveat Randi gave was that the magician or mentalist should be present at these experiments because they're more qualified to spot trickery, and that they should only have one object in front of them at a time.
What's the last one about?
Why they should only have one object at a time?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's full on how sleight of hand happens, and that's actually how some of these things are going to get bent later, so I'll cover that here in a little bit.
Okay.
Also, Randi said that he would do this absolutely for free for their experiments if they would let him sit in on it. And they said that they could do it without his help, thank you very much, and sent him on his way. At this point, more than 300 so-called psychics were interviewed. When the selection process was over, Phillips and his team had selected Steve Shaw and Mike Edwards, two young men who showed exceptional promise towards actually having psychic powers. Little did the scientists know that both of these magicians were specifically trained and instructed by James Randi himself.
Oh, this is good. This is getting good.
Upon first meeting Professor Phillips, Steve Shaw, now known as Banachek, you guys might have seen him on various shows and TV spots. He's incredible as a mentalist, a great magician. He's a lot of fun to watch. He asked Phillips a question about the bracelet he was wearing. Phillips said that it was a bracelet he got from a witch doctor in Africa that provided protection. In this moment, Shaw knew that this trickery was going to be easier than he thought.
So, let's be clear here. These guys who are doing the experimentation really want there to be psychic powers.
Yes, that's the implicit bias, is that the people that usually go into parapsychology are looking to prove it, and they really, really want it to be true.
I would like to say here, I don't know if this is the bad idea, but sort of an overarching bad idea that science has to fight against all the time is the fact that it's really difficult not to have this happen in an experiment. Usually, if you go into an experiment, especially if you know the scientific method, there's the whole thing where you're supposed to make a hypothesis at the beginning. You think that one thing is going to happen, and it's tricky not to make an experiment that then proves the thing you thought was going to happen will happen.
Yeah, and that's why usually whenever one experiment proves something, you have a bunch of follow-up experiments from different scientists to see if that's actually true.
You're supposed to.
Yeah, you're
anyway.
supposed to. You're supposed to. That's how science works, but a lot of these papers that get put out only get like maybe 5 or 6 other experiments done on them, if that, and they don't really get a whole lot of people reading it. So there's a lot of cognitive bias, and there's a lot of things that go into bad science, and unfortunately, scientists are people too, and they can make mistakes, and this experiment is going to show quite a few of those.
All right, continue.
On the way from the airport, Shaw noticed a briefcase in the car. He pulled it over and found it was locked. After picking the lock, the briefcase was filled with silverware for the experiment. As a demonstration of his powers, Shaw bent all of the silverware by hand, locked the case, and put it back where he found it. During this time, there was a new idea called spontaneous psychic kinesis, in which things spontaneously bent or move around when psychics are near, sort of like a hiccup in their abilities. This immediately had Phillips thinking it was real. His students were a little more skeptical.
Well, so the guy who's teaching them is like, "Oh, I'm on board," and the students who are there to learn are like, "Wait a minute, professor, shouldn't we like?" I don't know, get a different briefcase that he can't open or doesn't know about?
Yeah, well, that's what they actually decided to do next. One of the things that you'll immediately notice about Steve Shaw in videos is that he notices everything. This guy's brain is like kicked into overdrive all the time. He's looking for cues, he's putting things into your head with the way he's using hand movements, all sorts of different things. And he's looking at any possible method to aid in his tricks. In the experimental rooms and the rooms around it, he noticed that there were really oddly placed pieces of metal. Coins under VCRs, forks in random drawers, things of that nature. So, whenever the students were out on their lunch break, he would make sure to disrupt every one of these. And that was all it took to get the students on his side.
This guy's clever. I feel also compelled to say that at this moment, that while I may be very skeptical about like actual psychic ability, let us not be limiting in what the human mind actually is capable of, because we can do some pretty incredible stuff.
If you want to see an example of the mentalist powers this guy has, you search for Joe Rogan Questions Everything Banachek, and there is some insane stuff that this guy can do. He puts 2 coins over his eyes, has someone duct tape them down, has a random person in the audience pull a dollar bill, and he will straight up tell you the serial number off of it. I don't know how the hell he does that. I don't know how he does a lot of the things he was doing on that show, but he straight up tells you before it gets started. He's like, this is just flat out a trick. There's no psychic things happening. I'm doing this based on your cues. And it's very interesting.
There's a great Netflix magic special that came up as recently as well about magic for real people, or I want to say magic for humans. And there was a lot of stuff in there. I was like, that's incredible. I have no idea how he did that. Assuming that it wasn't like, faked on the show, but I trust them. I trust the magician to want to actually do the trick.
Yeah, and some of these guys are they're incredible minds, and it's not extrasensory power, but it definitely takes a very, very good mind to pull some of this off. And I can't even imagine how much practice. There's so much that goes into that. Yeah. Like, whenever you hear Penn and Teller talk about the amount of time that goes into a single new trick, you realize that you have to be incredibly dedicated to just get a few decent tricks. So it's always interesting to see what magicians can do. It was at this point that scientists showed Shaw and Edwards the list of 13 caveats that Randi had written himself. One of the scientists said, "We know it would make you uncomfortable if we followed these, but we want you to be comfortable, so we're not going to."
Wow. Science, guys, come on. It's not like a Motel 6. I'm not sure the Motel 6 cares that much about your comfort.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, we want your $40, get out. One of the biggest caveats was to only have one item at a time being used, as well as having invisible and visible dual labeling on the objects. During tests, these specifically measured spoons and forks had proper tags on them. And the way they did it, they would take calipers, they would measure the arch in a spoon or a fork or various other small parts of these objects, and they would take them after they had these sort of psychic interactions and measure to see if anything had changed with them. Using sleight of hand and very subtle trickery, all Shaw had to do was switch the labels so that every time they measured these utensils, things were slightly off. There were differences of millimeters here and there, and a lot of times during these tests, he would lean over the table to grab one, put his elbow on a fork, and just smush it down a little bit. So it's just all like sleight of hand, easy to pull off types of stuff, and he only had to alter it a few millimeters, so it didn't take that much effort. I've seen him actually do incredible tricks where like he holds the spoon up and it'll twist around like 3 times, and I still don't know how he does that, especially because whenever they handed that spoon to somebody else, this being Joe Rogan, who's full-on meathead giant, he had a hard time untwisting the spoon. So the guy has some major tricks, and I can understand why they would do it. I'm just so surprised that they, on video, just straight up didn't pick up anything that was happening here for a while.
I love that they're so fixated on spoons. Like, it's not any other metal that they bent could like really catastrophically change the world around them, but like, no, their watches work just fine. Like, they haven't bent any of that metal. Well, their cars are ticking along just great. They haven't messed with the like the valves or whatever. It's just spoons and stuff.
Well, they did actually test some things with car fuses.
Okay.
Like, they would...
Spoke too soon.
Yeah, like Sean Edwards were testing using car fuses in which they were supposed to hold the fuse and using their abilities tell the scientists the exact moment that the fuse blew in their hand. In reality, they were using the same exact fuses every single time, and they weren't labeled, so using sleight of hand, they just swapped it out with one of the broken fuses and then handed it to the scientists.
Wait, so were they also supposed to be, like, blowing the fuse with their mind?
Yeah. They were supposed to blow the fuse with their mind.
In my head, the way they were doing this experiment was they actually had a current going through the fuse, and they were turning it up and turning it up and turning it up, and when it popped, the psychic was supposed to say, "Oh, it just went out, like I can tell."
No, they were just holding it in their hand and using their psychic powers to pop the fuses, so they would just hand them spent fuses that they had.
Okay.
And it wasn't, like, they also had a few different things. They had this sealed transparent globe, and there were a bunch of small bits of paper on the inside, and they were supposed to make things move in the globe. There was a time where Shaw wasn't able to do this for like a month and a half, but then he noticed the container was being removed to replace the object within. During one such event, he took the opportunity to roll up a small ball of metal foil and drop it into the circular ring, and to cut a surface into the table that allowed it to have just the slightest bit of air going into the globe. This introduced a small gap under one edge, and they could blow to cause the paper and the things inside of the globe to move.
Even all of these experiments that they're designing, it's like these guys have literally never gone to see a magician before.
Yeah, it's all so simple. It's like, have multiple cameras, check your work, see what's going on.
Well, it's not even... I'm not saying that... Obviously, the things that the magicians do are complicated. Like, they're wondrously complicated and fun to... Like, I don't know how they did that. I can't figure it out. But my brain does not then go to... Must be a real psychic.
Yeah. And this is where things... Like, this is where they almost started getting sloppy, where it kind of became a joke to them. Shaw and Edwards were so thorough that they would leave windows unlocked during the day, come back at 4 in the morning... and then bend all the metal in the building, change all the experiments, and then just kind of walk out and come back the next day.
So they weren't even on the premises? They were just like dreaming psychic stuff about the building in the researcher scenario?
I think it was more that they were prepping it for whenever they came in the next day.
Oh, so they would like point at a drawer that they knew had a bent spoon in it and just be like, Kazam!
Yeah, they'd be like, I felt it. You might want to check that drawer, like that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And so it was stuff that was outside of the experiment areas of the building they weren't supposed to be in and things like that. So they just basically were breaking into the building at night to rig experiments. By 1981, Randi started rumors that these two were planted in the school to disprove their methods. But the department denied this, saying, the rumors seemed unlikely to be true for several reasons. The two young men came from different states that had never met before, being brought to the Mac lab. If they were both conspiring with Randi, the plot had gone on for 21 months. What critic would be so persistent engaging in fraud and conspiracy on such a timescale? There seemed to be no precedent, nor was it possible to track down how reliable the rumor might be.
I do love that they're like, what critic could possibly do this when they actually have been discussing the methods that they're using with the critic that is doing it, and he's like, I will go to any lengths to prove to you this is not true.
Yeah. After a workshop with the Parapsychological Association convention in 1981, many scientists started to question Phillips' methods. Due to pressure from the community, he made the test more stringent, and the successes of Edwards and Shaw started to dwindle. This set of experiments would go on for more than 21 months and 180 hours of testing. Then Randi decided to drop a bomb on this experiment. At a press conference for Discover magazine, the pair would perform many of their tricks in front of the press and audience to great applause. Then Randi walked to the podium and asked the men, "Can you tell us how you did it?" To which they responded, To be quite honest, we cheat. And the crowd just gasped, and the secret was fully out. Like, there was just an uproar of people, both confused, amazed, and you could definitely hear some laughing that was going on in the background, too. Randy had set up...
I would have been the one laughing. I would have been I'm tickled right now that these guys, for a year and a half, more than that, actually.
Yeah, 21 months, so just a little shy of 2 full years.
Sat in this, and you got to imagine, for that year and a half, it must have been a magical time for parapsychology. You're like,
we have proof. We've proved it. Like, we are going to be like famous. People are going to read our books. Like, it was.
Well, they're publishing papers, right?
Yeah.
They're in like actual academic journals with like, take a look at this, guys. I told you psychics were real.
That Discover magazine press conference was for a scientific journal too. So it's like they're doing that in front of like the people who do the peer reviews and everything else.
Well, at least they got a good show.
Randy had set up these scientists to prove that they needed experts out of the scientific community to help come up with better experimental methods for debunking fraudulent psychics. Randy, Sean, Edwards would spend a considerable amount of the time for the rest of their careers exposing frauds, everything from psychics to faith healers. And like I said, they are very public about a lot of this exposure. They will straight up just tell, like, they will put people in the most uncomfortable possible positions. Sometimes they do it on TV, sometimes they do it in podcasts. They do a lot of different ways of doing this. And Shaw, who is actually now Banachek, like I said, has done amazing things, runs his own show, and he's one of the more interesting ones I've ever seen. Like, I don't understand any of the tricks he's pulling. I just know that he will straight up tell you that it's fake. To which there are actually a lot of people out there that think that he's a real psychic saying it's fake so that he can get more attention. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. If I was a real psychic, I would just, even if I wasn't a real psychic, I might tell people I was. Lots of people have that weren't.
But the bad idea here is basically going into a science experiment with preconceived notions on what you want to prove and not being willing to go the extra mile to make sure that you are doing your experiments properly. Like, it's pretty simple here. Some would say it was a bad idea to go and do this, that there was a lot of malice behind what they did and that they ruined a bunch of careers. But it's like, if you're not going to apply the methods that you've dedicated your life to in proving this just because you're excited, then you weren't really doing the science correctly anyway.
I would also say, just as a supplemental bad idea, don't go toe-to-toe with the magician. Those guys are incredibly disciplined, and they're incredibly patient. There's a great book about magicians that I've read recently called The Magician and the Card Sharp, about this guy who wanted to learn this one specific card trick from a guy who was just using it to cheat at cards. And one of the tricks that he did was based on the fact that he bought his way into a men's suit factory and planted a particular card in the lining of all the suits so he could do a trick where he had that card come up and then he could cut that suit. If every time he saw one of these suits, he knew that he could do this trick where he would cut the card out of the lining of the suit. That is forward-thinking dedication right there. These guys are not stupid.
No. Just be happy that a lot of them are doing it for entertaining and entertainment, not to con you.
Exactly. There's got to be somebody out there who's using that for evil, but like the ones we get to hear about are the entertainers.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much everything I have on Project Alpha. I don't know if I was clear about it. Project Alpha was actually what Randy called this experiment. Like, his Project Alpha was to prove that you need to have these people in there.
Okay.
So that's all I have on this. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for being patrons. Thank you for spreading the word about bad ideas. If you go to patreon.com/humanechoes, you can get some awesome stuff. We have a new pin coming out in a few weeks. It's going to be awesome, and I hope you guys have an excellent, excellent day.
Take care.